Ladies and gentlemen, out here in the Wild West, where the wind carries stories older than any map, and the night sky watches every soul that dares to survive beneath it, there are tales that don't just get told, they claim you. Tonight, I bring you one such story, a story born from dust, danger, and destiny. It begins with a lone cowboy, a man used to silence, saddle leather, and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat against the empty plains. And it begins with an Apache woman, fierce, proud, and hunted by a pack of wolves, whose hunger echoed the harshness of this unforgiving land. When their paths crossed, it wasn't just a rescue. It was the moment two worlds collided. Because after he drove off the wolves and lifted her from the cold grip of death, she looked him in the eyes, sharp as flint, steady as the morning star, and declared words that would change the course of both their lives. "You're my man now." The cowboy's lone journey across the harsh frontier was never meant to be easy. Yet he had long accepted the silence, the grit, and the relentless demands of the land as part of who he was. Days bled into nights as he rode beneath a sky so wide it felt like it could swallow a man whole. The desert wind carried whispers of danger, and the distant howl of predators reminded him that survival out here was not guaranteed. It was earned. He traveled with nothing but his horse, a worn saddlebag, and the quiet thoughts of a man who had spent more time with the stars than with people. Every sunrise found him already miles away from where he had slept, and every sunset left him wondering what challenge the night would bring. His path was never straight. Sometimes he followed the faint trails left by buffalo herds. Other times he cut across raw land, untouched by anything but the winds. The frontier had a way of testing a man's resolve. Water was scarce, storms came without warning, and the rugged wilderness demanded a strength that came from deep within. But solitude had become his companion. He found a certain peace in it, even though the silence pressed in hard enough to make lesser men lose themselves. He knew the scent of coming rain, the shift of predators on the move, and the language of hoofprints on dry soil. These things grounded him more than any town or conversation could. Yet beneath that hardened exterior beat the heart of a man still searching, even if he didn't know for what. Perhaps a purpose, perhaps a place, perhaps someone who could understand the life carved into his bones. As he traveled, he carried the weight of unspoken memories, regrets, and hopes buried too deep for words. The world around him was alive with danger and beauty, intertwined like threads in a woven blanket. The canyons echoed with stories, the plains shimmered with heat, and every ridge he crossed held the possibility of something unexpected. On that particular day, the air felt different. The wind carried an uneasy chill, and the birds had gone silent. His instincts sharpened, warning him that something or someone was out there in trouble. It was in these moments his sense of purpose sparked, pushing him forward with a clarity he rarely felt. Little did he know that this lone journey of his, shaped by hardship and silence, was about to collide with a life or death struggle that would change everything. The path ahead would lead him not into another battle with the elements, but into the heart of a story he never expected to become part of. The wolf attack came without warning, the kind of sudden violence the frontier was known for. Swift, merciless, and born of desperation. The Apache woman had been traveling alone, weakened from days without proper food or shelter. Her steps unsteady, yet determined. She carried the spirit of her people in her eyes, fierce, even in exhaustion. But hunger and fatigue had taken their toll. She sensed the danger before she saw it. The low rumble of growls circling her like ghosts in the brush. Wolves, driven by hunger and the bitter edge of winter, had been tracking her for miles. When they finally emerged, their yellow eyes glinting and teeth bared, she knew the fight would cost her everything she had left. She faced them with what strength remained, gripping a stone knife though her hands trembled. Her heart pounded in her ears as the wolves advanced, a coordinated dance of predators closing in on prey. The first one lunged, and she managed to fend it off, slicing its muzzle. But the effort sent her crashing to her knees. The pack tightened around her. Each second felt stretched, heavy, as if the land itself held its breath. She refused to scream, refused to show the fear clawing at her insides. An Apache woman did not beg. She stood until she could stand no more. But her vision blurred, her limbs weakened, and she knew she was moments from being overrun. Just as the wolves prepared for the final strike, the crack of a rifle cut through the chaos. A sharp echo rolled across the canyon walls like thunder. One wolf fell, then another, confusion breaking the rhythm of their attack. Through her fading vision, she saw a lone figure on horseback, charging toward the fight. Dust swirled behind him, the sun outlining him like a spirit riding out of legend. The cowboy's horse skidded to a halt, and he fired again with precise, practiced movements. The wolves snarled in frustration before retreating into the brush, disappearing as swiftly as they had appeared. When the silence returned, the woman collapsed fully, her breath shallow, her body shaking from shock and blood loss. She felt strong hands lift her gently, as if afraid she might break. For the first time in days, warmth touched her. The warmth of a human voice calling to her, telling her she was safe. As he carried her, she fought to keep her eyes open, studying the stranger who had risked his life for her. In that fragile moment, between life and death, she understood something instinctive and powerful. Her fate had shifted, and this man had stepped into a role he did not yet know he had claimed. The bond that formed between them did not happen in a burst of emotion or with dramatic declarations. It began quietly, like a small flame sheltered against the wind. When the cowboy lifted the Apache woman into his arms and carried her away from the site of the attack, their connection was born out of survival, raw, immediate, and real. He took her to a sheltered clearing, tending to her wounds with the same careful hands he used on injured horses or frightened travelers. Every movement was gentle, respectful, as though he understood instinctively that she was a woman of immense strength, brought low only by circumstance. He spoke little, for he knew words were often wasted on pain. But his silence carried its own comfort. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she was aware of him. She noted the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of the fire he built, and the protective way he positioned himself between her and the dark. To her, these gestures were not small. In her culture, actions revealed the heart far more than speech. He had not just saved her life, he had taken responsibility for her well-being without hesitation. That alone stirred something deep within her. She watched him as he worked, recognizing in him the spirit of a warrior, not because he fought for glory, but because he fought simply because someone needed help. The cowboy, for his part, found himself unexpectedly drawn to her strength. Even wounded, she held her dignity like a shield. She did not complain or question him, but observed everything with sharp, assessing eyes. He admired that. He was used to people who needed rescuing falling apart, clinging to him for reassurance. But she was different. Even in pain, she carried herself with pride. He felt a strange respect for her, one that eased into something warmer as the hours passed. As the night deepened, their unspoken bond grew. She understood that he was trustworthy, a man who would not abandon her to fate. He understood that she was more than a victim. She was a survivor, someone forged by hardship just as he was. In the quiet glow of the fire, two worlds that had always walked separate paths found a shared rhythm. There were no promises made, no vows exchanged, and yet something solid formed between them. It was a connection born from danger, but strengthened by mutual recognition, the unmistakable sense that fate had not brought them together by accident. Cultural clashes began to surface the moment she regained enough strength to sit upright and truly study the man who had saved her. The cowboy was unlike anyone she had known. Tall, weather-worn, with the quiet reserve of someone who lived by his own rules. She came from a world where every gesture carried meaning. Every decision mattered to the tribe, and honor was measured by one's service to the people. He came from a world built on independence, where a man survived by relying on himself alone. Their differences were clear, yet neither felt threatened by them. Instead, they approached each other with an instinctive curiosity. When he offered her water, he held it out carefully, waiting for her to take it instead of forcing it into her hands. He didn't know that in Apache culture, such respect was a sign of good character. But she noticed. In return, she tried to speak, her voice hoarse, offering him a phrase of gratitude in her own language. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the intention. This became the rhythm of their communication. Simple actions, careful observations, and a growing effort to bridge the gap between them. As dawn broke, he tried preparing food for her, but the spices and methods were foreign to her tastes. She watched him struggle with a mixture of amusement and confusion. Food to her people was prepared with meaning, roasted over earth, seasoned with the land's own offerings. Yet she accepted what he made, recognizing his intention, even if the flavor was strange. In return, she gestured towards certain nearby plants, trying to show him which herbs were good for healing. He followed her guidance, fascinated by her knowledge of the land, realizing she understood the wilderness at a level he had never reached. Their conversations were sparse, but their exchange of skills and awareness spoke volumes. He taught her small practical things, how to use his canteen, how to wrap a wound with his cloth bandages, how to saddle his horse without straining her healing body. She taught him how to read the wind, how to listen for danger in the quiet, how to see patterns in tracks he had always overlooked. Each discovered the other's strengths, and neither tried to dominate or dismiss the other's way of life. Sometimes, misunderstandings flickered between them. A gesture he meant as politeness might be interpreted differently in her culture, or a protective act from her might seem bold or abrupt to him. Yet each time, they found a way back to understanding. Slowly, these cultural differences did not divide them. They deepened their connection. They realized they were learning not just about each other's worlds, but about what it meant to trust someone completely. In the vast Wild West, where survival demanded cooperation, their differences became the very bridge that drew them closer together. When her strength finally returned enough for her to stand on her own, the moment that followed took the cowboy completely by surprise. He had spent days tending to her, watching over her through cold nights and long hours of silence, thinking she might simply thank him and continue on her way once she recovered. But to her, the world did not work in such simple, loose terms. Among her people, loyalty was not a fleeting concept. It was a bond forged by action, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk one's own life for another. And he had done exactly that. The wolves could have killed her, but they could have killed him too. His choice to protect her carried a meaning far deeper than he understood. When she finally stood before him, leaning lightly on a walking stick she'd fashioned from a branch, there was a clarity in her gaze that made him pause. She stepped close enough for him to see the fire in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude, strength, and something even more powerful beneath the surface. She placed her hand over her heart, then reached toward him, a traditional gesture of claiming an honor among her people. The cowboy stiffened, uncertain of what she was doing, but he didn't pull away. Her voice was steady, low, and filled with the gravity of someone speaking a truth that could not be undone. She told him, in accented but clear English, the words that would change everything. "You're my man now." The cowboy blinked in disbelief, unsure he had heard correctly. But she repeated it with the certainty of someone who had already made her choice. To him, it sounded like a bold declaration, unexpected, perhaps even startling. But to her, it was a statement of honor and bond. In her culture, a woman did not give such words lightly. They were a pledge, a recognition of courage, and a promise of partnership. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. No woman had ever spoken to him that way, not with such direct fire, not with such unwavering certainty. He had lived most of his life alone, drifting from one place to another, without belonging to anyone or anywhere. Yet here she stood, claiming him not out of desperation or dependence, but out of respect and choice. He realized then that the rescue had meant more to her than a simple act of kindness. She saw him as someone worthy, someone who had shown the heart of a warrior. And though he had never imagined himself tied to anyone, something in her declaration struck deeply. Her words weren't a command. They were an invitation, one filled with meaning he was only beginning to understand. In that moment, under the vast Wild West sky, the cowboy felt the ground beneath his feet shift. Her declaration wasn't just a vow. It was the beginning of a destiny that neither of them could walk away from. The days that followed her declaration became a turning point neither of them could have anticipated. The cowboy, long accustomed to drifting across the frontier, with no ties and no destination beyond the next sunrise, felt a shift inside him. Something steady, something grounding. He didn't fully understand the weight of her words at first, but he sensed their importance. She had not spoken them casually. They were rooted in a deep cultural meaning, a vow that carried honor, loyalty, and partnership. As they traveled together, he began to see the subtle ways her declaration shaped their path. She walked beside him with a confidence that seemed to say she had already accepted their intertwined fates, while he found himself adjusting his pace to match hers, watching the trail for danger, and silently taking responsibility for her safety without question. Yet this new bond wasn't one-sided. Just as he protected her, she began to protect him in ways he didn't recognize at first. She taught him signs he had missed all his life. How to read the stillness before a storm. how to recognize when another tribe's tracks meant danger or peace, how to understand the calls of birds that signaled predators ahead. Her presence sharpened his instincts and broadened his awareness. He'd always thought he knew the West, but through her eyes, he realized he had only scratched its surface. She saw the land not as an obstacle, but as a living, breathing partner. And slowly, he began to see it that way too. Their loyalty to each other grew naturally, strengthened not by spoken promises, but by shared actions. At night, when they sat beside the fire, their silence no longer felt empty. It felt companioned. She would prepare certain herbs to help ease his aches from long days of riding, while he ensured the fire stayed bright enough to keep predators away. When danger appeared, a wandering cougar, a sudden river crossing, or distant riders whose intentions were unclear, they faced it together, reacting as one. The cowboy realized that her declaration had not bound him against his will. It had given his life a direction he hadn't known he was missing. As the Wild West tested them with dust storms, narrow escapes, and the constant uncertainty of a land untamed, their bond only deepened. He grew to respect her wisdom as much as her courage, and she learned to trust his judgment and steady strength. Through each trial, they discovered that loyalty wasn't just about protection, it was about partnership. Their destinies, once separate journeys marked by solitude and struggle, began to weave into a single path shaped by mutual respect and unspoken devotion. In the end, what they found together was something the frontier rarely offered: a sense of belonging. In a land where survival demanded both resilience and heart, they became more than two travelers sharing a trail. They became each other's anchor, proof that even in the unforgiving Wild West, fate had a way of bringing the right souls together. In the end, their story becomes more than a tale of survival. It becomes a testament to how fate weaves lives together in ways no one can foresee. A lone cowboy, shaped by the silence of the frontier, crosses paths with a proud Apache woman whose strength refuses to bow even in the face of death. What began as a rescue in the wild quickly transformed into a bond forged by honor, trust, and a respect deeper than either of them expected. They came from worlds divided by culture, language, and tradition. Yet those very differences became their greatest strength. In learning from each other, they discovered truths about themselves. In protecting each other, they unlocked courage neither knew they possessed. And in accepting each other, they built a partnership that defied the harshness of the land around them. Her declaration, "You're my man now," was not just a moment of gratitude. It was a vow, a promise that she saw something in him worth standing beside. And though he had lived his life believing he belonged nowhere, he found in her a sense of purpose he had never known. Together, they carved out a path through the untamed West, not as strangers, but as allies bound by something stronger than chance. Their story reminds us that connection can rise from the most unlikely moments, that courage is often shared, not carried alone, and that sometimes the greatest journey isn't the miles we travel, but the people we choose or who choose us along the way. Under the endless sky of the Wild West, two souls found each other when all odds said they never should. And in doing so, they proved that destiny doesn't whisper, it roars.